This is the Creative Market Free Goods Roundup week of October 5th, 2015. There are 6 different free goods this week, but they are free this week only. So if you see something you like in this video, just check out the description of this video where I'll place links to each one of these 6 different free items. So first up here is Wood Logs, 12 premium photos. This is a very straightforward item as it is 12 photos of logs and wood in JPEG format. And as far as the image size in these goes, if I go to image and then image size, it's 6,000 by about 4,000 pixels high, so these are more than big enough for pretty much anything on the web or a lot of different print applications as well. But since we're just dealing with a lot of pictures of logs or wood, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly since I think just scrolling through these fairly fast should give you a pretty good idea of what you can expect. Images like this are very popular to overlay designs on top of if you're going for either a retro or vintage look, as well as general hipster themed items tend to really enjoy images of stacked logs and stuff like that. So if that's something you're looking to recreate, then there's a ton of different options here to pick from and use and apply to your work. And as you can see with all the different colorations of these two, they look a little bit faded, a little bit more of a vintage aesthetic as far as the age of the photo goes, although I'm sure they're pretty new. They've been washed out and desaturated a little bit to make them look like they're older photos. But that's it for this pack. There's 12 different photos of logs stacked on top of each other here. And if you think you'll have use for these log pictures in the future, just be sure to grab it this week while it's still free. Next up is Bladekade High Quality Typeface. So this main font here, which is called Bladekade, is provided in open type format, and there's also a bonus font in this download, which if I highlight this, it says it's called Alpha, and Alpha is included in both open type as well as true type font formats. And also included in the folder for the Alpha font are these bonus icons or extras. So there's 2 different versions, one that has this kind of interesting texture knocked out of it, and then one that for the most part doesn't. There's a light bulb that does, but in general there's a whole bunch of different icons here for you to go in and use that should work pretty well in combination with the sort of vintagey retro inspired fonts. Now I'll just quickly zoom in on the textured versions of these different icons or added bonus elements right here so you can kind of get a good idea of how that looks. So a lot of these are nature themed or have a kind of vintage theme to them. Overall they have a pretty roughened or well distressed look that should go nicely if you're trying to create a little bit older looking design or have a bit more of a vintage aesthetic to your work. And here are the same items. For the most part they're the same items. There are a few different ones that do not have that texture knocked out, except this light bulb for whatever reason does have the texture knocked out. And a lot of these too have pretty neat roughened edges on them that kind of help sell the idea of these being a little bit older or perhaps a stamped item. But I'm going to switch back to the main part of this item right here, which are these fonts. So this is the primary font that's being offered right here, and that's called Bladekade, and it's a nice script font that has a pretty interesting vintage vibe, but then it's a stenciled font as well, which is something that's kind of unique as far as I've seen in the past. Once again, these have that really neat roughened edge to them, so when you look at these letters up close, it's a pretty cool looking font, and it's, like I said before, really interesting to see that this is a stencil based script font, which is kind of a neat combination to have. And I think all these letters work super well together, and as you can see if I zoom out, they do include both lowercase as well as uppercase letters on this font, and all these letters work really nicely together. They also do include numbers 0 through 9, so everything there, but it is worth noting on this particular font that there aren't any special characters, so no punctuation or stuff like that. So that leads me to believe that they really want you to use this as a headline font and not as something that you want to type out full sentences or paragraphs in. So I typed up Free Goods Roundup right here so you can see how this looks typed up into a sentence. I think the flow of the letters overall is really good. These work very nicely together, and the stock kerning as well as spacing between the words looks really good to me as well. There's some pretty nice interactions when I look at these up close too, like on the word roundup, how the N kind of has this swoosh that goes up to the D. It doesn't look too forced, it actually looks pretty natural, and this is just typed up without any modifications to kerning or tracking or anything like that. So on a stock level, this seems to work really nicely together, and if you want to spend the time to make things flow even better, you can certainly go in there and do that. And here is the other font, which is called Alpha, and this is an all caps font, and right here are the letters. So this is a serif font, and it also has a little bit of a wavy or wavering look that make this look a little bit more hand-drawn than if it was completely rigid. And I'll go down through the last few letters right here so you can get a good idea of how these look as well. And on this font they include all the numbers 0 through 9, as well as a small handful of different special characters. Not a huge offering of special characters on this one, but all the basic punctuation is included, so at least on this particular font, if you want to type out longer sentences, you can do that a little bit easier. And I typed up Free Goods Roundup on this one as well, and as you can see, the stock kerning looks fairly decent. I might clean it up a little bit. Like if you look at the word free, the R to the E, this E could be pushed back a little bit. But overall, since this is a very hand-drawn looking font, I think little variances like that are a little bit more acceptable than on a font like Helvetica, where you'd want everything to be absolutely perfect and look extremely clean as soon as you type it up. But that's it for this collection of fonts and bonus items. As you can see, there's a whole lot to get here, so this is quite a lot when you pick up this download to go in and check out, and hopefully you'll get a whole lot of use out of it. So if you liked what you saw in this video, just be sure to pick it up this week. Next up is double exposure Photoshop action. This is a Photoshop action, so you are going to need Photoshop to use this. I don't have Photoshop Elements to test this in, so I can't tell you if it works in there or not. But if you are a Photoshop Elements user and you do attempt to use this, you can maybe leave a comment and let people know if it worked for you or not. And you want to open up your Actions window first of all, so go to Window and then Actions near the very top here. So I went ahead and installed this action, which is right here on my screen, called Double Exposure Photoshop Action. To install it, there is an instructions file included, so you can either follow that instruction, or a lot of times if you just double click on the action, it'll open it up in Photoshop automatically for you. So that's a really easy way to install it if you want to go ahead and do that. And what this does is create a double exposure effect, which is an interesting way of overlaying two images on top of each other. So for my base image, I use this image of this mountain range right here, and then I overlaid this image of a bear on top of it. So I'll go ahead and show you what the action did when I ran the action, which is right here. So as you can see, this is a kind of cool effect, and it does a nice job of overlaying this bear image on top of the image of this mountain in the background right here. I stuck this in a folder, but by default it doesn't put it in a folder. All these different items will just kind of live on top of it. So there's also some customization that you can do when you run this action under the More Options folder. So you can add either more contrast, which as you can tell does a slight pump up in contrast. And if I were to go ahead and just hit Control J while this layer is selected to duplicate it, or Command J on a Mac, that'll add even more contrast if you want to keep pumping this thing up a little bit more. There's also an option for black and white if you'd prefer to do this in black and white. And then there's one for shading, which if you want to give this a little bit more of a washed out or worn out look, you can go ahead and do that. And if you want to customize how the shading looks a little bit too, you can just adjust the opacity of it, so you can make this a little bit more or less apparent as you see fit. And also inside the photo folder, there's another one called Normalize right here that if you turn it on, you can see that it has a much different effect that makes things even more pronounced. So once you run the action itself, you can go in here and play with all these different settings and different options, and you can adjust the opacity of this as well to kind of get a very custom look to this, depending on the style that you're really trying to achieve here. But I didn't have any problems running this action. It seemed to work really well, and you can certainly experiment with different types of photos overlaid on top of each other. A lot of times people will use someone's portrait of their face or something like that. In this case I used a bear because that's the image that I had, but I think you could do a lot of experimentation with this and get some really cool results if you're willing to spend the time to do that. But that's it for this action. Like I said before, it works really well for me at least, and I think the end result is pretty cool. So if you think you might have some use for this Photoshop action and you want to kind of go in there and play around with it a bit, just be sure to pick it up this week while it's still free. Next up is Auberge Plus WordPress theme. This is a theme for WordPress, and this is actually a really interesting theme as far as the content goes, since it's sort of a mix between either a restaurant or a coffee shop, but also if you're trying to teach people how to cook or demonstrate recipes and stuff like that, it covers that in a very cool way, so I'll show that in just a bit. And this theme is also fully responsive, so it should look good on no matter what kind of device you're looking at it on. So as I scroll down here, you can see there's things like menu, and then there's different tabs for the different main courses. So if you click on one of these, it'll just automatically zoom down to that particular portion. There's a pretty generous footer at the bottom here with recent posts, a tag cloud, and then a nice long about section. If I scroll back up the top here and go to news and click on one of these news items, it'll bring me to that page. And for example, if you look at this, there's a button right here that says skip to recipe. So if you want to post recipes of different things that you're making or want to show people how to make, just click on that button and it will bring you down to this really cool little field right here where it lists out all the ingredients as well as things like difficulty and how much it's going to make in the prep time. But if you click on the radio box right here, it kind of checks this off and does a strike through the words. So if you're trying to teach people how to cook in particular, this is a really interesting theme for that. If you are perhaps a food blogger or even like a YouTuber who teaches people how to cook on there and you want a companion website, as you see right here, there is a video embedded. So that's a particularly interesting use that you could use this for if you want to go ahead and do something like that, or if you already are doing something like that, then this might be a perfect website for you to pick up and go ahead and use. And as you can tell at the bottom here, there are comments with a nice little comment form. And I'm just going to go up here to the reservations section so you can kind of check that out. So there is a book a table table included here, so you can go ahead and select a date and time and request a booking. If I click on the menu tab very quickly, it lists out all the different items. If you are a restaurant or a coffee house or something like that, if I click on this, it brings up a nice big image, where if I click on the actual title, it'll bring me to a page that explains this particular thing. And this also has the recipe, so if you are perhaps like, let's say, a diner or a restaurant, you might not want to include your recipe, but if you're teaching people how to cook, then this is a kind of cool thing to have on there. The About section has a few different things you can go ahead and check out, and right now it's all just filler type, but you can go ahead and make this appropriate for what you're trying to convey here. There's also a blog, and it's a very nice and cleanly laid out blog. As I scroll down here, you can see there's a few different formats, from things like SoundCloud to this little image gallery slider right here. And if I click on one of the posts, it'll bring me to that particular page. In this case, it's showing you a style guide for the different headings and whatnot, and different features that this WordPress theme happens to offer. If I click on contact here, it'll bring me to a nice and simple contact page. In this case, there's two different locations, so there's two different Google Maps for you to go ahead and check out, and then a nice and simple contact form at the bottom here. That's really it for this theme. It has a pretty cool overall theme for the theme, I guess you could say, with the kind of mix of a restaurant and then also cooking instructions. So like I said before, whether you're a restaurant or perhaps someone teaching people how to cook, for either one of those two uses, this could be a super cool theme to start out with, because it has a lot of really neat built-in functionality that could be very useful to you. So if this looks like something you might have use for, and I think if you are a person who's going to use this, you probably know right away that this is a really cool theme for you. And if that's the case, just be sure to download it this week while it's still free. Next up is 3 hip iPad and iPhone mockups. This is a collection of 3 different mockups in Photoshop format for both iPads and then iPhones, as you see here. So like I said before, there are 3 in total, each of which feature the iPad as well as the iPhone. So these are actually very easy to use. So there's different folders inside here, and the main one you want to pay attention to is the folder called Replace with Your Design. To replace these placeholder images inside these mockups right here, just open up that folder, and then there's 2 different smart objects inside each one of these folders where you can double click on it that says Place Your Design. So double click on that, and then you can just go ahead and replace your design inside of here. You can go to File, Place Embedded, or Place Linked. Either one should work just fine. You can just pick that and then select a file from the folder of your choice. Just to show you that this is working, I'm just going to rotate this around upside down really quick and then apply this change. And then to apply this to your mockup, you just want to hit Control S on a PC or Command S on a Mac to save this smart object window, and then you can feel free to go ahead and close it. I'll just draw a smiley face on this as well, so you can see that appears in there as I close this. So now on this iPad right here, this has updated it to be upside down, and you can see that smiley face I drew in there, so you can see how easy these are to apply your own work inside of. And for the size of these, if I go to Image and then Image Size, this one's 4200 and a little bit by almost 2900 pixels, so that's plenty big for almost anything you want to use it for. I'm assuming that usually these are used on the web, but as far as print goes, this is about 14.25 by 9.5 inches, so that's plenty big for a lot of print applications as well. And these all have that kind of hipster theme, although this one right here features an Audi R8 and a magazine ad, which I wouldn't exactly consider a hipster item, although it is a very cool car. But there are 3 different layouts to go in here and use for you to kind of pick from and choose from, so you can pick whichever layout works the best for the project that you're currently working on. But that's it for this item. If these mockups look like something you might find some use for, just be sure to pick it up this week. And last up is Grunge Texture Pack. These textures are provided in Illustrator, EPS, as well as transparent PNG format. So I have the Illustrator file opened up here, and as you can see, if I zoom out just a little bit, it's actually going to take a little bit of time because this is a very, very detailed file. You can see that there's a ton of different textures included. There are 25 in total, but because they are all placed on one Illustrator file, you can expect some potential slowdown on your machine. So if things run a little bit slow, it's just that with this many textures on one document, there's so many points and so many things for Illustrator to interpret that it might slow down your machine just a little bit. So if you intend to use these on a project, I'd suggest trying to find the one that you think looks the best and then just copy and pasting it onto a new document by itself so that your machine can run a little bit faster, and then just go ahead and close this original texture file right here. But as you can tell, there are a ton of different textures included, and they have a pretty decent variety of different styles as well, from extremely high coverage textures like these ones right here, and then there's also some textures that are much more sparsely populated throughout this. Like this one has a very interesting kind of scratchy look to it overall, where some of these are a bit more spongy or spattered, kind of like this one right here. So you can certainly go in here and kind of see if there's any of these textures that will work really well on a project that you have in mind. I think in general most of these textures will work best as background textures or background elements rather than overlaid on top of design lines and elements, but textures like this one right here and this one right here will also work very well overlaid on simple logo or type applications. Just kind of use your best judgment in terms of what you think will look the best. And if I zoom in really close on, like, let's say this one right here, which is actually a pretty cool texture, you can see that all the textures tend to have a very geometric look to them when you're very up close, which leads me to believe that most of these are probably live traced inside Illustrator to create the end result. As you can tell when I'm scrolling through this right here, there's a little bit of lag on my system. So like I said before, you're going to want to probably find the texture you want to use and bring that into a new document so everything can run as fast as possible. And since these are vector, if you were to bring any of them into Photoshop, you can make these as big as you want and you won't have to worry about losing quality, which is a really huge bonus point to using vector textures. But if you want to use the PNGs instead, like let's say you don't have Illustrator and you just want to get some use out of the textures inside just Photoshop or another similar program, you can feel free to use those. They should work just great. But that's it for these textures. There are 25 in total. So if you think these looked pretty cool and you think you might have some use for them in future projects, just be sure to grab them this week while they're still free. So that's it for this week's free goods, and do remember they are free this week only. So if you saw something you might have use for, check out the description of this video where you'll find a link to download it. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please like and favorite. And if you want to see this video every week, please subscribe. This video is released every Monday to let you know it's free this week on Creative Market. Thank you for watching.